Ramona watches in horror as CTO Jackson publicly deletes her code during the company's quarterly tech presentation. In front of 39 engineers, he mocks her work as legacy code holding back innovation. Her 6 months of work vanishes with a theatrical keystroke as colleagues stare in uncomfortable silence. Then her phone buzzes with a coincidental job offer. $700,000 chief architect position at their biggest competitor. Looking at Jackson's smug smile, a calm clarity washes over her. This moment isn't her humiliation, it's his. The morning had started like any other at TechForge. I arrived at 7:30, travel mug of coffee in hand, ready to put final touches on my presentation. 5 years at this company had taught me exactly how to navigate its politics, but nothing prepared me for what Jackson had planned. I'm Ramona Wells, 34 years old, senior software engineer. The kind of person who solves problems other people don't even understand. The kind of engineer who gets called at 2 in the morning when systems crash. The reliable one, the problem solver. The one who never complains. TechForge was my dream company once. I joined when we were still a scrappy startup with big ideas and bigger dreams. Our collaborative culture and innovative approach to financial technology had disrupted an entire industry. But things change. Success brings growth. Growth brings bureaucracy. And somewhere along the way, our spirit got diluted. I'd been passed over for promotion twice. The first time hurt, but I swallowed my disappointment and worked harder. The second time, I watched as my male colleague Brady was promoted instead. Brady, who regularly asked for my help debugging his own code. It's about leadership presence, my previous manager had explained awkwardly. You're technically brilliant, but the executive team wants someone more assertive. I promised myself the third time would be different. I'd make myself undeniable. That determination had only intensified when Jackson Ford arrived 8 months ago as our new Chief Technology Officer. Jackson came from one of those Silicon Valley darlings that burned bright and fast. His reputation preceded him. Brilliant but ruthless, innovative but impatient. He spoke in buzzwords and ultimatums. He wanted to move fast and break things at a company whose customers trusted us with their financial futures. His first week, he gathered the engineering department and announced his vision. TechForge has gotten comfortable. Our competitors are eating our lunch while we maintain legacy systems and outdated practices. That ends today. The room had buzzed with nervous energy. Half excited, half terrified. Jackson continued, pacing the front of the room like a general addressing troops. Some of you won't make it through this transition. That's fine. We need warriors, not maintenance staff. His eyes had swept the room, landing briefly on the few women present. Something in his expression made my skin crawl. Within months, Jackson created a culture of fear. Engineers worked weekends trying to prove their value. 3 senior developers quit. Our once collaborative stand-ups became competitive status reports where people exaggerated achievements and hid struggles. Through it all, I kept my head down and focused on the massive project Jackson had assigned me. Rebuilding our transaction processing architecture to handle 10 times our current volume while cutting response time in half. An impossible task, but I was determined to prove myself. I spent nights researching cutting-edge approaches, weekends testing prototypes, and early mornings documenting everything meticulously. This project would be my masterpiece, my undeniable proof that I deserved not just recognition, but advancement. Then came the first real shock. I was grabbing coffee when I overheard Tanya from HR talking with our finance director. 3 new senior engineers, all from Jackson's previous company, Tanya was saying. All starting at base salaries 40% above market. I don't know how we'll explain this to existing staff if they find out. I nearly dropped my mug. 40% above market? I'd negotiated hard for a 5% raise last review cycle and was told budgets were tight. That night, I opened my laptop and did something I'd never considered before. I began documenting everything. My contributions, the praise in emails, the problems solved, the late-night calls answered. I created a perfect record of my value, while maintaining my professional demeanor at work. What I didn't realize then was that documentation would save not just my career, but potentially the entire company. The weeks leading up to the quarterly technology review were intense. Our entire engineering organization would present progress to leadership, and Jackson had made it clear that this particular review would influence upcoming restructuring decisions, a thinly veiled threat that poor performers would be cut. My transaction processing architecture had evolved into something truly elegant. I'd solved the scalability problem with a novel approach that maintained data integrity while distributing load dynamically. The code was clean, thoroughly tested, and documented so well that any competent engineer could understand and build upon it. "This is seriously impressive, Ramona," said Ashley, a junior developer I'd taken under my wing. 26 with a quiet brilliance, Ashley reminded me of myself before years in tech had taught me to project confidence I didn't always feel. We were reviewing my presentation together in a small conference room. Outside, the May sunshine illuminated San Francisco's skyline. The distributed consensus algorithm alone would make Google recruiters drool, Ashley continued, scrolling through my slides. Jackson would be insane not to recognize this work. I smiled but felt the familiar tightness in my chest. Let's hope, though recognition hasn't exactly been his strong suit. Ashley glanced around despite us being alone and lowered her voice. "You should know he was talking about your project in the kitchen yesterday. Not positively." My heart sank. "What did he say exactly?" "Something about outdated approaches and academic solutions versus practical ones." I didn't understand his criticism technically, but the tone was clear. I nodded, trying to keep disappointment from showing on my face. "Thanks for telling me." That night, I couldn't sleep. Coding had been my sanctuary since I was 12, when my parents bought our first real computer. While other kids played games, I learned how systems worked. In college, I found a sense of order and control in programming that balanced the chaos of real life. Each solved problem was a victory, each elegant solution a work of art. Now my art was being preemptively dismissed by someone who hadn't taken the time to understand it. 2 days before the presentation, I was working late, making final adjustments to my demonstration. The office was nearly empty when I received an email accidentally included on a chain between Jackson and the board of directors. My blood ran cold as I read it. Jackson had presented my architectural solutions to the board as his own strategic initiative. He'd taken my diagrams, removed my name, and presented them as the CTO office's vision for next-generation transaction processing. I sat motionless, staring at my screen. The date on the email showed he'd done this 3 weeks ago, long before my presentation. He'd claimed my work preemptively, positioning himself to either take credit if my implementation succeeded or distance himself if it failed. My hands trembled with anger as I forwarded the email to my personal account, adding it to my growing documentation file. The morning of the presentation arrived crisp and clear. I dressed carefully in a charcoal pantsuit and sapphire blouse, hair pulled back in a precise bun. Professional, controlled, the opposite of how I felt inside. I arrived early to set up in the main presentation room. Through the glass walls, I could see the San Francisco Bay shimmering in the distance. The view had always calmed me before, but today nothing could settle my nerves. As engineers and product managers filtered in, I noticed Jackson huddled with 2 recent hires from his previous company, Thomas and Jordan. They glanced my way, and Thomas smirked before turning back to their conversation. Ashley slipped into the seat beside me. "You've got this," she whispered, and I noticed something unusual, a phone in her hand positioned partially in her lap. "Are you recording?" I asked quietly. She nodded slightly. "Just a feeling. Better to have it and not need it." Before I could respond, our CEO Diana Powell entered, surprising everyone. Diana rarely attended technical reviews, trusting her leadership team to filter important information upward. "Thought I'd see what all the excitement is about," she announced, taking a seat in the back. At 52, Diana had the polished look of someone comfortable with power. She'd founded TechForge 12 years ago and guided it from startup to industry leader. Jackson recovered quickly from his surprise. Excellent! We have some breakthrough approaches to share today. The presentations began. I waded through updates on mobile development, security enhancements, and infrastructure improvements. With each passing segment, my anxiety grew. Finally, Jackson announced, "And now, Ramona will present on transaction processing architecture upgrades." I stood, straightened my jacket, and walked to the front of the room, where 39 pairs of eyes watched expectantly. Little did I know that in less than an hour, my career at TechForge would be over, and Jackson's would be on borrowed time. "Thank you for this opportunity," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. The conference room was arranged in tiered seating, creating an amphitheater effect that made the 39 engineers and executives seem like an audience at a theater waiting for the show to begin. If only I had known what kind of show Jackson had planned. I connected my laptop to the projector, and my carefully prepared slides appeared on the massive screen. The first slide showed a high-level overview of the current architecture, with its bottlenecks highlighted in red. As we all know, our transaction processing system has served us well, but it's reaching capacity limits that will impact customer experience within 6 months. The solution I've developed addresses not just current constraints but positions us for the next 5 years of growth. I clicked to the next slide, showing my proposed architecture. Several engineers leaned forward with interest. I had their attention now, and despite my nerves, I felt a surge of pride. This was good work, solid, innovative, and precisely what TechForge needed. I was 3 minutes into my explanation when Jackson interrupted for the first time. "Ramona, isn't this approach rather conventional? I'm concerned about the scaling limitations." The question made little sense. My design specifically addressed scaling beyond anything our competitors had achieved. I explained this patiently, highlighting the distributed consensus mechanism that was actually the most innovative part of the design. Jackson nodded with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. I continued, moving deeper into the technical implementation. 2 slides later, he interrupted again. "These response times seem theoretical. Have you stress-tested this in production-like scenarios?" "Yes," I replied, clicking ahead to my testing results slide that I'd planned to present shortly. "As you can see, we're achieving 47 millisecond response times at 5 times our current peak load." A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Those were impressive numbers, and everyone there knew it. Jackson's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. I continued, explaining how the implementation could be rolled out in phases to minimize disruption. I was halfway through this explanation when Jackson stood up. "Let me stop you there, Ramona," he said, walking toward the front of the room. "I think we're getting lost in the details of what is essentially a Band-Aid solution." The room went quiet. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but kept my expression neutral. "Perhaps I should demonstrate a more forward-thinking approach," Jackson continued, now standing beside me. Without asking permission, he unplugged my laptop and connected his own. My presentation disappeared, replaced by his desktop. "What's happening?" Diana asked from the back of the room. Jackson smiled broadly. "A teaching moment, Diana. Sometimes we need to see the contrast between incremental thinking and true innovation." He opened a terminal window and navigated to our code repository. My heart began pounding when I realized he was accessing my implementation branch. "The problem with legacy thinking," Jackson announced to the room, "is that it builds on old foundations when sometimes we need to start fresh." He turned to the room dramatically. "Legacy code is holding us back. Watch me delete it, and then I'll show you what real innovation looks like." Before I could protest, he executed a command that began deleting my entire codebase from the repository. 6 months of work disappearing line by line on the screen before me, and 39 witnesses. "What are you doing?" I managed to say, my voice barely audible. Clearing the path for progress, Jackson replied loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Your approach was admirable, but ultimately too cautious. We need to think bigger." The terminal finished its deletion process. My entire codebase was gone. The room was so silent, I could hear the ventilation system humming. That's when I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. Still in shock, I pulled it out automatically and saw an email notification. The subject line read, Apex Technologies formal offer chief architect position. The timing was surreal. I'd interviewed with Apex, our biggest competitor, 2 weeks earlier, not seriously considering leaving, but wanting to understand my market value. Now, as I stood humiliated before my colleagues, they were offering me a $700,000 compensation package, more than double my current salary. I looked up from my phone to find Jackson watching me with that same smug smile that said he believed he'd won. Something shifted inside me in that moment. A lifetime of swallowing indignities, of working twice as hard for half the recognition, crystallized into perfect clarity. I looked directly at Jackson, then surveyed the room. Ashley was still recording discreetly. Diana looked confused and concerned. My colleagues seemed uncomfortable, but none spoke up. It seems the universe has impeccable timing, I said, my voice now strong and clear. I held up my phone. I've just received a job offer from Apex Technologies for the chief architect position at $700,000 annually. I turned to Jackson. I accept the offer. Effective immediately, I resign from TechForge. Jackson's smile faltered. This wasn't in his script. Let's not be hasty, he started, but I cut him off. There's nothing hasty about this decision. You've made the company's valuation of my contributions perfectly clear. I began packing up my personal items from the table. I suggest you start thinking about how transaction processing will work without my code or my knowledge, as you've just deleted both from the company. Diana stood up. What is going on here? Jackson, did you just delete Ramona's project without authorization? Jackson turned to her, composure slipping. It's a standard technical decision to pivot from an underperforming approach. Underperforming? I questioned. Newfound confidence surging through me. The tests showed response times better than anything in the industry. Diana's expression darkened. I want to see both of you in my office. Now, as I walked out of the room, head held high despite the emotional turmoil inside, I heard the buzz of shocked conversations erupting behind me. The most dramatic tech presentation in TechForge history had just concluded, but its repercussions were only beginning to unfold. The walk to Diana's office felt like traversing an alternate reality. Engineers stared as I passed, news of what happened already spreading through messaging channels. Jackson followed several paces behind, furiously typing on his phone. Inside me, emotions warred for dominance: shock, anger, vindication, anxiety. But externally, I maintained the composed demeanor I'd perfected over years in male-dominated tech spaces. Diana's corner office offered panoramic views of the city, but she wasn't admiring the scenery. She stood behind her desk, expression stern. Sit, she commanded. We did. Now someone explain exactly what happened in there. Before Jackson could speak, I placed my phone on her desk. I'd like to formally submit my resignation. I have the email drafted and ready to send. Diana ignored this. I asked what happened. Jackson leaned forward. I made a technical decision to pivot from an approach that wasn't meeting our forward-looking requirements. Perhaps my delivery was theatrical, but sometimes bold statements are needed to shift organizational thinking. He deleted 6 months of my work without review, backup, or transition planning, I stated flatly. Work that, according to all metrics and testing, exceeded the project requirements by significant margins. Diana's gaze shifted between us. Is there a backup of the code? Of course, Jackson said quickly. All our systems have redundancies. I smiled thinly. The repository has backups, yes. But only I have the complete context and understanding of the implementation. The documentation was scheduled to be finalized next week. This was partially true. I had comprehensive documentation on my personal backup drive, but it hadn't been uploaded to the company wiki yet. A task scheduled for after the presentation. Diana turned to Jackson. Did you review her code thoroughly before deleting it? His hesitation was brief but telling. I reviewed enough to determine it wasn't the direction we should pursue. Diana's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, frowned, and set it aside. Ramona, is this job offer real or a bluff? It's real, I said, opening the email on my phone and sliding it toward her. Apex approached me 2 weeks ago through a recruiter. I interviewed but wasn't seriously considering leaving until today. Diana scanned the offer details, eyebrows rising slightly at the compensation package. That's significantly above market, she noted. Apparently not, I replied. I recently learned that Jackson has hired former colleagues at 40% above my compensation level, despite my longer tenure and comparable responsibilities. Jackson shifted uncomfortably. Different roles have different market rates. Diana's phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. She answered, listened briefly, and her expression transformed from annoyed to alarmed. When? She asked. How many customers are affected? Keep me updated every 15 minutes. She hung up and fixed Jackson with an icy stare. The transaction processing system is experiencing failures. 28 high-value customers can't complete trades. Jackson paled slightly. That's impossible. We have redundancies. Apparently not adequate ones, Diana said. This started immediately after your dramatic deletion demonstration. My mind raced through possibilities. The production systems shouldn't have been affected by repository changes. Unless, did you deploy any changes to production this morning? I asked Jackson. His silence was answer enough. Diana stood. Jackson, go work with the infrastructure team to resolve this immediately. Her tone left no room for discussion. After he left, Diana turned to me. Don't send that resignation email yet. With respect, Diana. What happened today is just the visible symptom of deeper problems at TechForge. Problems I've documented extensively. I pulled out my phone and forwarded her an email with my documentation attached, chronology of events, screenshots, performance reviews, contribution metrics. Diana glanced at the incoming email but didn't open it. I need you to help fix the immediate system issues. We can discuss everything else after. I shook my head. I can't continue working in an environment where my contributions are devalued and my work can be destroyed on a whim. I've accepted Apex's offer. My phone rang. It was Apex's CEO, Paul Winters. May I? I asked Diana, who nodded curtly. Ramona, I just heard what happened at TechForge, Paul said when I answered. News travels fast in our industry. I want to revise our offer to 850,000 plus accelerated stock vesting. We need your talent, and we'd never treat you with such disrespect. The timing was almost too perfect. Someone at TechForge must have contacted him immediately after the incident. The tech world's rumor mill operated at fiber optic speeds. Thank you, Paul. I'm very interested. Can I call you back in 30 minutes? I'm just concluding matters here. After hanging up, I looked at Diana. Apex has increased their offer. Diana sighed deeply. Ramona, I had no idea these issues were occurring. Jackson has presented a very different picture of the engineering organization. I believe that, I said sincerely. But it doesn't change what happened or the culture he's created. Diana's phone rang again. More system issues. More angry customers. TechForge was facing a technical crisis, and the one person who fully understood the affected systems was sitting across from her with one foot already out the door. I faced an ethical dilemma. Walking away would be justified but would harm innocent colleagues and customers. Staying would send the message that such treatment was ultimately acceptable. I'll help stabilize the systems, I finally said. But not as a TechForge employee. Consider it a short-term consulting engagement at Apex's new rate. Diana looked surprised, then relieved, then calculating, all in the span of seconds. She was CEO for a reason. Agreed, she said. And I'd like you to brief me fully on these cultural issues once the technical situation is resolved. As I stood to leave, Ashley appeared at the door, looking uncertain. Sorry to interrupt, she said. But there's something you both should see. She held up her phone, showing us a social media post already gathering attention. Someone had leaked a video clip of Jackson deleting my code and my subsequent resignation. The tech community was erupting with reactions, most supporting me and condemning TechForge. Diana closed her eyes briefly, now dealing with not just a technical crisis but a public relations one as well. Damage control will have to wait, she said. Systems first. As we walked toward the engineering floor, I checked my phone to find dozens of messages from colleagues, friends, and even recruiters who'd already seen the video. My personal crisis had become a very public referendum on tech culture, gender dynamics, and leadership accountability. The next 3 hours would determine not just my future, but potentially TechForge's as well. The engineering floor was in chaos when we arrived. Developers clustered around monitors, support staff fielded angry customer calls, and operations teams attempted to restore services. Jackson stood in the center, barking contradictory instructions that only increased the confusion. "Everyone stop," Diana commanded, her voice cutting through the noise. The room fell silent. "Ramona will lead the recovery effort. Everyone else, support her as needed." Jackson started to protest, but Diana silenced him with a look. I quickly assessed the situation. We need 3 teams. Infrastructure to restore service from backups, customer support to manage communications, and a technical documentation team to reconstruct what we've lost. Within minutes, the chaos transformed into organized activity. I worked methodically, identifying which systems were affected and prioritizing recovery steps. This was familiar territory, the calm problem-solving mode where everything except the challenge at hand faded away. "The backups from last night are corrupted," Sam from infrastructure reported after 30 minutes. "What about the secondary backups?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "Also corrupted. It looks like someone implemented a new backup protocol without proper testing." All eyes turned to Jackson, who had been surprisingly quiet during the recovery efforts. "The new protocol was thoroughly vetted," he insisted. "By whom?" Diana asked. "By my team at my previous company. We used it successfully there." I exchanged glances with Ashley, who was documenting everything. Another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Jackson had implemented untested protocols from his former company without proper review. "The corruption goes back 3 days," Sam continued. "We have clean backups from last week, but we'll lose all the transactions since then. That's hundreds of millions in trading activity," Diana said, her composed exterior finally showing cracks. "Completely unacceptable." I considered our options. I can reconstruct the transaction log from the database journal files. It won't be elegant, but it will preserve the data integrity. "How long?" Diana asked. 2 hours if I can focus completely." She nodded. "Do it. Everyone else, give her space." As the room cleared out, leaving just me, Ashley documenting the process, and 2 senior database engineers, I immersed myself in the complex task of rebuilding transaction logs from raw journal files. An hour in, my phone rang. It was Paul from Apex again. "Ramona, I've heard you're helping TechForge recover. That speaks volumes about your character. Our offer stands, and we'll wait until you're ready." "Thank you, Paul. I should be finished here in about an hour." After hanging up, I noticed a message from Tanya in HR. "Jackson is telling the executive team you deliberately sabotaged the systems. Diana's asking for evidence either way." I showed Ashley, who immediately forwarded the video she'd recorded to Diana with a message. Jackson deleted the code publicly. Ramona has been nothing but professional. 45 minutes later, as I was finalizing the transaction log reconstruction, Diana returned with the company's general counsel, Martin. "How much longer?" she asked. "Testing the solution now," I replied, "initiating the verification process. Should be back online in 15 minutes if the tests pass." Martin spoke quietly to Diana, who then addressed me. "Jackson is claiming you embedded self-destruct mechanisms in the code that activated when it was deleted." I laughed despite the seriousness of the situation. That would be both highly unethical and unnecessarily complicated. The simpler explanation is that his untested backup protocol failed, and his unauthorized production deployment this morning destabilized systems that were already fragile. "We need more than your word," Martin said. Ashley stepped forward. I have the repository logs showing Jackson deployed changes at 6:15 this morning without code review or change management approval. Martin reviewed the logs on her screen, then nodded to Diana. This supports Ramona's version of events. 2 hours and 53 minutes after the presentation debacle, the transaction processing system came back online. Customer data was intact, and trades resumed processing. The crisis was averted, but the aftermath was just beginning. Diana, who had been fielding calls from board members and major customers, looked exhausted but relieved. Thank you, Ramona. You saved us from a disaster that could have ended the company. The company I care about, I said. It's the leadership I've lost faith in. Diana nodded grimly. The board has called an emergency meeting. They've seen the video and reviewed the logs. Jackson has been suspended pending investigation. I closed my laptop and began packing up my things. Then my work here is done. What can we do to keep you? Diana asked. Name your terms. The question caught me off guard. After everything that had happened, staying hadn't seemed like an option. Yet, TechForge had been my professional home for 5 years. It's not about compensation, I said finally. It's about respect, recognition, and creating an environment where innovation thrives through collaboration, not fear. Diana considered this. What if you had the authority to create that environment? What are you suggesting? A new position, Chief Technology Officer. The offer was stunning, exactly what I'd worked toward for years, yet something had shifted inside me. The public humiliation, followed by the crisis and recovery, had changed my perspective on what I wanted from my career. I'm honored, I said sincerely, but I've accepted Apex's offer. I need a fresh start. Diana looked disappointed but nodded. I understand. But I hope this isn't the end of our professional relationship. As I left the building, carrying a small box of personal items, engineers stopped what they were doing to watch. Some nodded respectfully. Others looked away, perhaps embarrassed by their silence during my public humiliation. Ashley walked me to the elevator. You're a legend now, you know. What Jackson did and how you handled it, everyone's talking about it. I smiled tiredly. Not how I plan to become famous in tech circles. Are you really going to Apex? Yes. Fresh start, bigger role, better compensation, and hopefully a healthier culture. The elevator arrived. Before stepping in, I turned to Ashley. You should update your resume. I might know a company looking for talented engineers who stand up for what's right. She grinned. I'll send it tonight. As the elevator doors closed, I felt a complex mix of emotions, pride in how I'd handled the crisis, sadness at leaving a company I'd helped build, and excitement about the future. In just 3 hours, everything had changed. Jackson's career was in freefall, while mine was soaring to new heights. The next morning, I woke to find my phone overflowing with notifications. The video of Jackson deleting my code had gone viral overnight, sparking intense debate about toxic tech culture, gender bias in engineering, and leadership accountability. 3 major tech publications had run stories with headlines like TechForge CTO's public code deletion backfires spectacularly, and how not to treat your senior engineers. A masterclass in failure. A text from Ashley informed me that TechForge's stock had dropped 12% in pre-market trading. Investors were concerned about both the technical instability and the cultural implications revealed by the incident. I started my day with a video call with Paul and the Apex executive team, who were eager to accelerate my onboarding. We agreed I'd start officially the following Monday, giving me a few days to decompress from the TechForge drama. We're creating a welcome package for social media, Paul mentioned near the end of our call. The interest in your story is enormous. We've received hundreds of resumes overnight from engineers wanting to work with you. I felt uncomfortable with the attention, but recognized the opportunity it presented. I'd like to use this platform to talk about building healthy engineering cultures, not just to criticize my former employer. Paul nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of leadership we were hoping for. After the call, I decided to check LinkedIn, where my profile had gained thousands of new followers overnight. Among the messages was one from Thomas, one of Jackson's hires from his previous company. "You should know things are imploding here," he wrote. "After you left, 3 more systems failed. Jackson couldn't fix them, and he's blaming everyone but himself. 4 engineers resigned this morning. Diana has called in external consultants, but they're struggling without your context." I was composing a polite but distant reply when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Ramona Wells?" a woman's voice asked when I answered. "Yes, who's calling?" "Sarah Chen, from the Wall Street Journal. I'm working on a story about yesterday's events at TechForge and would love to get your perspective." I hesitated. Publicly criticizing TechForge could burn professional bridges, but staying silent might allow Jackson's version of events to prevail. "I appreciate your interest," I said carefully. "But this isn't just about one bad manager or one company. It's about systemic issues in tech culture that need addressing." "That's exactly the story I want to tell," Sarah responded. "Would you be willing to speak on the record about those broader issues, using your experience as context?" We scheduled an interview for that afternoon. Before I could put my phone down, it rang again, this time Diana. "The board just finished an emergency meeting," she said without preamble. "Jackson has been terminated, effective immediately." I wasn't surprised, but hearing it confirmed still sent a wave of vindication through me. "The technical issues?" I asked. "Worse than yesterday. Without your knowledge of the systems, the external consultants are struggling. And we've lost 7 engineers so far, with more threatening to leave." I remained silent, letting her continue. "The board has authorized me to offer you a consulting contract at any rate you name to help us stabilize the platform. No strings attached, no expectation that you'll return permanently." I thought about the customers and the remaining engineers who were suffering the consequences of Jackson's actions. "I'll consult for 3 days, 4 hours each day," I decided. "My rate is $1,000 per hour, and I'll need complete authority over technical decisions during that time." "Agreed," Diana said immediately. "And Ramona? I'm sorry, I should have seen what was happening and stopped it." Later that afternoon, after my interview with Sarah, I drove to TechForge for my first consulting session. The atmosphere had completely transformed since yesterday. Security guards stood at the entrance, and a PR team huddled in the lobby, presumably managing the crisis communications. In the engineering department, the mood was somber but determined. Engineers who had watched in silence during my humiliation now approached with apologies and questions. I focused on the technical tasks, documenting system architecture and creating recovery plans that could be implemented without my ongoing involvement. During a break, Ashley updated me on the latest developments. "Jackson tried to access the building this morning but was escorted out," she said. "He's been posting on social media claiming he was set up and that the video was edited to make him look bad." "The unedited video shows the same thing," I noted. "Exactly. No one's buying his story." She lowered her voice. "And 3 major clients have threatened to leave unless TechForge demonstrates significant cultural and leadership changes." By the end of my 4-hour session, we had stabilized the critical systems and created a roadmap for the remaining recovery work. Diana asked me to join a brief board meeting to explain the technical situation. The boardroom felt tense as I entered. 8 board members sat around a polished table, expressions grave. "Thank you for coming, Ramona," said William Grant, the board chair. "We want to hear directly from you about both the technical situation and the events leading to yesterday's incident." For 30 minutes, I provided a clinical assessment of the technical challenges and my recommendations for addressing them. Then, with equal professionalism, I outlined the cultural issues that had developed under Jackson's leadership, supported by specific examples and documentation. "Why didn't you raise these concerns earlier?" asked Janet Morris, another board member. "I did," I replied. "Through proper channels, to my direct manager and to HR, The documentation I've provided includes those communications and the responses received. William and Janet exchanged glances. We were never informed of these issues, William said. That represents a serious breakdown in governance. As the meeting concluded, Diana walked me out. The board has asked me to lead a complete cultural assessment and reorganization, she said. They're taking this very seriously. I'm glad to hear that, I replied. TechForge was a great company once. It can be again with the right leadership. The following day, my interview with the Wall Street Journal was published, focusing on constructive approaches to tech culture rather than specific criticisms of TechForge. Nevertheless, it generated another wave of attention. That same day, Jackson gave his own interview to a tech blog known for controversial takes. He claimed he'd been made a scapegoat for legacy technical debt and suggested my popularity stemmed from socially trendy concerns rather than technical merit. The interview backfired spectacularly. Technical leaders from major companies publicly contradicted his claims, and former employees from his previous company came forward with similar stories of toxic leadership. By the third day of my consulting engagement, TechForge had stabilized technically but continued to face challenges. Customers were returning, but talent recruitment had become difficult in light of the public scandal. In a final meeting with Diana and the executive team, I presented my complete technical documentation and transition plan. This should give your team everything they need going forward, I said, sliding a drive across the table. Diana looked at it, then back at me. What would it take to bring you back permanently? Not just as CTO, but as Chief Innovation Officer with a board seat? The room went quiet, all eyes on me. That's a generous offer, I acknowledged. But my future lies elsewhere now. However, I would be open to serving on your technical advisory board if you're serious about rebuilding the culture here. Diana smiled for the first time in days. Consider yourself appointed. We'll formalize the details next week. As I left TechForge for the final time, I reflected on the incredible transformation of the past 3 days. Jackson's attempt to publicly humiliate me had instead ended his own career while launching mine to new heights. But more importantly, it had created an opportunity for meaningful change in an industry often resistant to it. My phone buzzed with a text from Paul at Apex. Office is ready for Monday. Team can't wait to meet you. The future starts now. Indeed it did, and it looked brighter than I ever could have imagined. 1 month later, I stood before a room of 50 engineers at Apex Technologies, presenting my vision for our next-generation architecture. The atmosphere couldn't have been more different from that fateful day at TechForge. Nervous excitement rather than fear, collaborative energy instead of competitive tension. Any questions? I asked after outlining the core concepts. Hands shot up around the room, eager to contribute, not afraid to ask. This was the culture I'd hoped to find, one where innovation thrived on diversity of thought and mutual respect. My transition to Apex had been remarkably smooth. Paul had introduced me as someone who represents the values we aspire to: courage, excellence, and integrity. My compensation package had been finalized at $850,000 annually, plus equity that could be worth substantially more. But the most satisfying part of my new role wasn't the money or the title. It was the opportunity to build something from the ground up, surrounded by people who valued my contributions. Ashley had joined me at Apex 2 weeks after I started, along with 2 other talented TechForge engineers who'd reached out asking if there were opportunities. All 3 were thriving in the more supportive environment. I never realized work could feel like this, Ashley had told me over lunch yesterday. I'm doing the most challenging technical work of my career, but I'm not constantly anxious or worried about being undermined. After my presentation concluded, I returned to my light-filled office to find an email from Diana. The subject line read, "You were right." The message was brief but meaningful. TechForge Board approved the complete culture and leadership restructuring plan today. The Technical Advisory Board meets next Tuesday if you're still willing to participate. We're rebuilding something worth being proud of again. I smiled and typed a quick acceptance. Despite everything that had happened, I still cared about TechForge and the people there. Helping them rebuild a healthy engineering culture would benefit not just that company, but potentially influence others in the industry. My phone buzzed with a news alert. I opened it to find an industry publication reporting that Jackson had been rejected for a CTO role at a startup after their engineering team threatened to quit if he was hired. His technical reputation, once sterling, had been irreparably damaged by both his actions at TechForge and the subsequent revelations about his leadership at previous companies. I felt no joy at his downfall, only a sense that justice had been served. The tech industry had sent a clear message. Treating people with disrespect and undermining their contributions wouldn't be tolerated, no matter how technically brilliant you might be. That evening, I accepted an invitation I'd been considering for weeks, giving a keynote address at Women in Tech Summit, an annual conference for female technologists. My topic: Building Inclusive Technical Cultures, Beyond Diversity Statistics. The conference organizer was thrilled. "Your story has resonated with so many people," she told me. "But we're more interested in your vision for the future than rehashing the past." That aligned perfectly with my own thinking. What had happened with Jackson wasn't just about one bad manager or one difficult moment. It represented systemic issues that required systemic solutions. Over the weekend, I launched a mentorship program for women in technical roles, leveraging my sudden prominence in the industry to create something meaningful. 20 senior women technologists had immediately volunteered as mentors, and applications from potential mentees were pouring in. The following Tuesday, I attended my first TechForge Technical Advisory Board meeting. Walking into the building felt strange, memories of my public humiliation and subsequent triumphs still fresh. Diana greeted me warmly. "The changes are already having an impact," she said as she walked me to the conference room. "Applications are up, and we've managed to rehire 2 of the engineers who left." The meeting was productive, focused on both technical strategy and cultural indicators. I provided honest feedback on their plans, drawing on my experiences both at TechForge and now at Apex. Afterward, Diana asked me to walk through the engineering department. As we passed through, engineers stopped to greet me, some expressing gratitude for the changes that had come from my stand against toxic leadership. "You've become something of a symbol here," Diana observed. "I never wanted to be a symbol," I replied. "I just wanted to be respected for my work." "Sometimes the most important changes come from people who never intended to create them," she said thoughtfully. 2 months after the incident, the Wall Street Journal published a follow-up piece titled, "After the Viral Moment: How One Engineer's Stand Changed 2 Companies." The article detailed the positive transformations at both TechForge and Apex, using them as case studies in how technical organizations could create more inclusive and innovative cultures. My interview for the piece focused not on Jackson or that day's humiliation, but on the broader lessons. True innovation comes from environments where people feel safe to contribute their best ideas, where diverse perspectives are valued, and where leadership serves the team rather than ego. The reporter asked if I had any regrets about how everything unfolded. "I regret not speaking up sooner," I answered honestly, "but I'm grateful for where the journey has taken me." Sometimes our greatest growth comes through our most difficult challenges. 6 months later, I stood on stage at a major tech conference, looking out at hundreds of engineers, product managers, and technical leaders. My keynote on the human element in technical excellence had just concluded to enthusiastic applause. During the Q&A session, a young engineer asked the question I'd come to expect. "What would you say to Jackson if you could speak to him now?" I considered carefully before answering. "I'd thank him," I said finally, "not for what he did, but for the clarity his actions brought me." Sometimes we need to experience what we don't want to truly understand what we do want. His dramatic deletion of my code ultimately freed me to build something much better, both technically and culturally. The response earned thoughtful nods throughout the audience. As I left the stage, my phone buzzed with a message from Paul. "Board meeting approved your proposed expansion. Green light for the Innovation Center and 50 new engineering positions." I smiled, thinking about how differently things had turned out from what I'd expected that morning 6 months ago. One moment of public humiliation had transformed into a platform for positive change that now extended far beyond my own career. That evening, I met Ashley and several team members for dinner to celebrate the expansion approval. "Did you ever imagine things would turn out this way?" Ashley asked as we waited for our meals. "That day when Jackson deleted your code?" "Never," I admitted. In that moment, I only felt shock and anger. I couldn't see the opportunities that would emerge. "It's like you wrote in your blog," another team member added. "Sometimes what looks like deletion is actually creation in disguise." I nodded, remembering the post I'd written about resilience and reinvention that had unexpectedly gone viral. The key is how we respond to those moments. Do we let them define us as victims? Or do we use them as catalysts for something better? The conversation drifted to our upcoming projects, the technical challenges we were excited to solve, the culture we were continuing to build. Not once did we mention Jackson or TechForge by name. They were parts of our past, not defining elements of our future. Later that night, as I stood on my balcony looking out at the city lights, I reflected on the journey of the past 6 months. From senior engineer to chief architect, from silent accommodation to public advocacy, from isolated contributor to community builder. The greatest lesson hadn't been about technology or career strategy. It had been about the power of standing up for yourself with dignity, about the unexpected doors that open when you refuse to accept disrespect, and about how one person's principled stand can create ripples of positive change far beyond themselves. In deleting my code that day, Jackson had inadvertently helped create something far more valuable and lasting than any software I could have written. A template for how technical organizations could operate with both excellence and humanity. That was a legacy worth building, one line of code and one human interaction at a time. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a professional setting? What gave you the courage to take that stand? And how did it change your path? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more authentic experiences about navigating the modern workplace. Share this story with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for their worth. Thank you for listening, and remember that your value isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you respond to that treatment.